What would you do if you were 67 years old, celebrating your 45th wedding anniversary on a dream cruise, and suddenly found yourself shipwrecked on a completely deserted island with no rescue in sight? What if days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into 3 full years of complete isolation from civilization? That's exactly what happened to Barbara and Thomas Green, a retired couple from Portland, Oregon, who thought they were embarking on the vacation of a lifetime. Instead, they faced a test of survival that would challenge everything they knew about themselves, their marriage, and what human beings are truly capable of enduring. What they built on that island wasn't just shelter. It was a testament to human resilience, creativity, and the power of love to sustain life even in the most impossible circumstances. Their story of survival involves ingenuity that would amaze engineers, discoveries that shocked scientists, and a bond that grew stronger with each passing day of isolation. This is the true story of 3 years that changed everything. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from and tell us in the comments. Could you survive alone on a deserted island with only one other person for 3 years? Barbara Green was 67 years old, a former elementary school teacher who had retired 3 years earlier after 40 years in the classroom. Thomas Green was 70, a retired civil engineer who had spent his career designing bridges and infrastructure. They'd been married for 45 years, raised 3 children, and now enjoyed a comfortable retirement in their modest home in Portland. For their 45th anniversary, their children had pooled money to give them something special, a 2-week Caribbean cruise departing from Miami. It was the trip of a lifetime, something Barbara and Thomas had always dreamed about, but never felt they could afford. "I can't believe the kids did this for us," Barbara said as they boarded the cruise ship in early October, her eyes shining with excitement. "Look at this ship, Tom. It's like a floating city." Thomas squeezed her hand, equally amazed. 45 years ago, we got married in your parents' backyard with 20 people and a homemade cake. Now look at us, going on a fancy cruise. We've come a long way, Barb." The first 5 days of the cruise were magical. They danced in the evenings, tried exotic foods, visited tropical ports, and felt young again. They renewed their wedding vows in a ceremony on the ship's deck at sunset, surrounded by other passengers who'd become friends. "I promise to love you for another 45 years, Thomas said, placing a simple flower lei around Barbara's neck. "And I promise to keep you laughing, even when your jokes are terrible," Barbara replied, making everyone laugh. On the 6th day, everything changed. The captain announced that a severe tropical storm was approaching, but assured passengers that the ship would navigate around it safely. "Modern radar and weather tracking made such storms manageable," he explained. "Nothing to worry about. But weather is unpredictable, especially in the Caribbean during hurricane season." The storm hit with brutal force in the middle of the night. Barbara and Thomas woke to violent rocking, the sound of crashing waves and emergency alarms blaring throughout the ship. "All passengers report to muster stations immediately," the announcement repeated over the intercom. "This is not a drill. Report to your assigned muster stations." They grabbed their life jackets and rushed into the corridor, which was already crowded with panicking passengers. The ship tilted dramatically to one side, sending people stumbling into walls. Thomas held Barbara's hand tightly as they made their way toward their assigned lifeboat station. The storm was far worse than anyone had anticipated. Waves crashed over the deck. Wind howled like a living thing. The ship groaned and creaked ominously. "Stay close to me," Thomas shouted over the noise. "Don't let go of my hand." They reached their muster station, where crew members were trying to maintain order and prepare lifeboats. The ship was listing badly now, taking on water somewhere below. What happened next was chaos. A massive wave, larger than any before it, crashed over the deck with devastating force. Barbara felt Thomas's hand ripped from hers. She was swept off her feet, tumbling in churning water, unable to tell which way was up. When she surfaced, gasping and choking, she was in the ocean. The ship was already 100 yards away, illuminated by emergency lights, slowly sinking. Debris floated everywhere. People screamed in the darkness. "Thomas," she screamed. "Thomas, where are you?" "Barbara, I'm here." His voice came from nearby. She swam toward it desperately, and moments later they found each other in the churning water, both clinging to a piece of debris that had been part of the ship's deck furniture. They held onto that floating debris for hours as the storm raged around them. The cruise ship sank completely. Rescue boats and helicopters arrived by dawn, but in the massive search area and continuing rough seas, not everyone could be found immediately. Barbara and Thomas, separated from the main group of survivors by strong currents, drifted for 2 full days, clinging to their piece of debris, hoping rescue would come. On the 3rd day, weak from sun exposure and lack of water, they saw land, a small island, heavily forested, with a beach of white sand. The current was carrying them directly toward it. "Tom, look," Barbara said weakly. "Land, we're going to make it." They washed ashore on that island on October 14th, exhausted, sunburned and scared, but alive. They collapsed on the beach and slept for hours. When Thomas woke, he looked around carefully. The island was small, perhaps 2 miles long and half a mile wide. Dense tropical forest covered most of it. There were no buildings, no signs of human presence, no boats in the surrounding water. "Barb, wake up," he said gently, helping his wife sit up. "We need to assess our situation." Barbara looked around, hope fading from her eyes. "Where are we? This isn't a resort island. There's nothing here." "I know, but we're alive. Rescue will come. We just need to survive until they find us." They had no idea that rescue wouldn't come for 3 full years. The first day on the island was spent mostly recovering from their ordeal at sea. They had no food, no water, no tools, and no idea where they were. The clothes on their backs and their life jackets were their only possessions. "First priority is water," Thomas said, his engineering mind taking over. "We can survive weeks without food if necessary, but only days without water." They explored the beach and found a small stream emptying into the ocean from the forest. Thomas tasted it carefully. Fresh water, clean and cold. It was their first piece of good luck. "Thank God," Barbara said, drinking deeply. "At least we won't die of thirst." They spent that first day close to the beach, hoping to see a ship or plane. None came. As night fell, they huddled together under a large tree, using palm fronds as makeshift blankets. "Rescue will come tomorrow," Barbara said, trying to stay positive. "The Coast Guard is probably searching right now." But tomorrow came with no rescue. And the day after that, and the day after that. By the 4th day, they had to accept reality. They were stranded, possibly for a while. They needed to think about survival. Thomas's engineering background became invaluable. He started solving problems systematically. "We need shelter, a way to signal rescuers, a reliable food source, and a way to keep track of time," he said. "Let's take it one step at a time." For shelter, they found a natural alcove in the rocks near the beach, partially protected from wind and rain. Using fallen palm fronds, vines, and bamboo-like plants from the forest, they constructed walls and a roof. It was crude but functional. Barbara, despite being exhausted and scared, contributed her own ingenuity. As a teacher, she'd always been creative with limited resources. "We need to organize," she said. "Even here, even like this, we need routine and purpose or we'll lose our minds." She started keeping a calendar by making marks on a smooth stone with charcoal from their fire. Each day, she made one mark. Each week, she made a special mark. This became her job, tracking time so they wouldn't lose count. Fire was their next challenge. Thomas remembered from his Boy Scout days decades ago how to create friction fire. It took him 3 days of trying, blistering his hands, before he finally created an ember and coaxed it into flame. "I did it!" he shouted, and Barbara cried with relief. Fire meant warmth, the ability to cook food, and psychological comfort. They kept that fire burning constantly, never letting it go out completely, feeding it carefully throughout each day and night. Food was more challenging. The island had coconut palms, which provided both water and food. Thomas learned to climb the trees by creating footholds and a rope from braided vines. At 70 years old, climbing 30-foot palm trees was exhausting and dangerous, but necessary. Barbara discovered edible plants in the forest, testing them carefully in small amounts to make sure they weren't poisonous. She found something similar to taro root, wild berries, and edible ferns. They also learned to fish using sharpened sticks as spears and hooks made from carved wood. It took weeks to become proficient, but eventually they could catch fish regularly in the shallow reef waters. After 2 weeks on the island, they had established a basic survival routine. They had shelter, water, fire, and food sources. They were surviving, but they had no idea how long they'd need to survive. "Someone will find us," Barbara said every evening. "The search is probably still going on. We just have to stay alive until they do." Thomas always agreed, though privately he worried. The island was remote, off any obvious shipping lanes. If search and rescue hadn't found them in 2 weeks, how long would it take? 1 month passed, then 2, then 3. By Christmas, they'd been on the island for over 2 months. Barbara cried that day, thinking about their children who probably thought they were dead. Thomas held her and let her grieve. "We're going to survive this," he promised, "and when we get home, we'll have one hell of a story to tell." Barbara laughed through her tears. "Only you would find the silver lining in being shipwrecked on a deserted island." But that humor, that ability to find light in darkness, became crucial to their survival. They made jokes, told stories, and refused to let despair take root. They also made a decision that would define their time on the island. "If we're going to be here a while," Barbara said, "we're not just going to survive, we're going to live. We're going to make this place as comfortable as possible. We're going to find joy even here." And that's exactly what they did. As months turned into their first year on the island, Barbara and Thomas transformed from desperate survivors into skilled residents of their unexpected home. Thomas's engineering skills flourished. He designed and built a proper house, elevated off the ground on a platform to avoid flooding and insects. Using bamboo, palm fronds, and vines, he created walls, a peaked roof that shed rain efficiently, and even a door that could be secured. Inside, they had separate areas for sleeping, food storage, and what Barbara jokingly called their living room, a space where they could sit comfortably in the evenings. Thomas also engineered a rainwater collection system, using large leaves to funnel water into hollowed bamboo containers. This gave them clean drinking water without having to walk to the stream constantly. He created tools, knives from sharpened stones, a hammer from a heavy rock secured to a wooden handle, a saw from a piece of metal they'd found washed up on the beach. "You're like Robinson Crusoe," Barbara told him admiringly as she watched him work. "Robinson Crusoe was one person," Thomas replied. "I have something he didn't. I have you." Barbara contributed equally to their survival and comfort. She created a garden, planting seeds from fruits they'd eaten and tending them carefully. Within months they had tomatoes, squash, and other vegetables growing. She also developed a sophisticated cooking area, with stones arranged for heat control and bamboo containers for steaming food. She experimented constantly, creating meals that were surprisingly varied and even delicious given their limited ingredients. She made soap from plant materials and ash, kept their living space meticulously clean, and even created a washing area for their clothes, which by now were heavily worn, but still functional thanks to her careful mending. But perhaps most importantly, Barbara maintained their humanity and dignity. She insisted they eat meals together at regular times, sitting properly rather than just grabbing food whenever. She organized their days with routines and rituals. Every Sunday they had what they called special dinner, where Barbara would prepare the best meal possible, and they would dress in their cleanest clothes and eat by candlelight made from coconut oil. "We're not animals," she said. "We're people, and we'll act like it no matter where we are." They also created ways to preserve their memories and messages. Barbara wrote on large, flat pieces of bark, using charcoal and plant dyes, creating a detailed journal of their time on the island. She documented everything: what they ate, what they built, how they felt, what they learned. Thomas built dozens of bottles from bamboo sections sealed with tree sap, filling each with a message, their names, and the approximate date. They launched these regularly into the ocean, hoping one might reach someone who could send help. They also maintained a large signal fire area on the highest point of the island, ready to light immediately if they saw a plane or ship. Every day, one of them would spend time watching the horizon, hoping for rescue. As their first year passed, they had created something remarkable, not just a survival situation, but a life, modest and challenging, but a life nonetheless. They celebrated their 46th anniversary on the island with a special meal, renewed vows, and flowers Barbara had cultivated in her garden. 46 years, Thomas said, holding Barbara's weathered hands. And I never imagined celebrating an anniversary like this. But Barb, I have to tell you something. These months with you, just us, no distractions, no TV, no phones, no obligations. I've fallen in love with you all over again. Barbara smiled, tears in her eyes. I know what you mean. We've talked more in the past year than in the previous 20. We've worked together, solved problems together, relied on each other completely. I wouldn't choose this situation, but I wouldn't trade this time with you for anything. They also made discoveries about the island itself. While exploring, they found evidence that people had been there before, though long ago. Old stone structures, partially reclaimed by jungle, suggested some ancient civilization had once inhabited the island. They even found carved stones with symbols they couldn't decipher. Whoever was here is long gone, Thomas said, but they survived here. They built something, just like us. These discoveries gave them hope and connection to the past. They weren't the first humans to call this island home, and the fact that others had lived here successfully made their own survival feel more possible. Their second year brought new challenges and new adaptations. A severe storm destroyed part of their house, forcing them to rebuild stronger. Barbara fell and injured her ankle, which took weeks to heal fully. Thomas developed a persistent cough that worried them both until it finally resolved, but they also developed new skills. Thomas became expert at predicting weather based on cloud patterns, wind direction, and bird behavior. Barbara became skilled at preserving food through drying and smoking, allowing them to build up supplies for lean times. They expanded their garden significantly, adding fruit trees they'd transplanted from the forest. They improved their fishing techniques. They even domesticated a pair of wild chickens they'd found in the jungle, creating a reliable source of eggs. Their home became increasingly comfortable. They had beds raised off the ground with woven palm fronds for mattresses. They had shelves and storage. They had a covered porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. If someone told me I'd be living on a deserted island at 68 years old, Barbara said one evening, I'd have thought it was a nightmare. But Tom, we've built something here. Against all odds, we've built a life. We have, Thomas agreed. But I still want to go home. I want to see our kids again. I want to hold our grandchildren. This is survival, Barb. It's not the life I want long term. I know, she said softly. I know. As their second year on the island progressed, Barbara and Thomas faced the psychological challenge that perhaps was harder than physical survival, maintaining hope when rescue seemed increasingly unlikely. It's been over a year, Barbara said one morning as she made her daily mark on the calendar stone. Why hasn't anyone found us? Thomas had theories. The island was remote, probably not on major shipping routes. The storm had carried them far from the ship's last known position. Search and rescue efforts probably focused elsewhere. After months with no signs of survivors, they'd likely been declared dead. Our kids think we're gone, Barbara said, crying. They probably had a funeral. They've mourned us and moved on. And we're here, alive, and they have no idea. These were their darkest moments, when the isolation and uncertainty felt overwhelming. But they developed strategies to combat despair. They created projects to give themselves purpose beyond daily survival. Thomas began building an elaborate signal tower, much taller than their previous efforts, hoping it might be visible from farther away. Barbara started teaching Thomas to read and write better, something he'd always struggled with, using the bark journals as textbooks. They also created entertainment. Barbara told stories, reciting from memory books she'd read over the years. Thomas carved chess pieces from wood, and they played endless games in the evenings. They sang songs, though neither had great voices. They even created simple instruments from bamboo and held what they jokingly called concerts. "We have to keep our minds active," Barbara insisted. "We can't just exist. We have to think, create, and challenge ourselves." They also really talked, in ways they hadn't in decades of marriage. They shared childhood memories, discussed regrets and dreams, talked about their children and grandchildren, and opened up about fears and hopes. "You know what I regret?" Thomas said one evening. "I regret all those years I worked so much overtime. I was providing for the family, but I missed so many moments. Soccer games, school plays, just dinners at home. I thought I was being a good father by working hard, but maybe I should have just been present more." "You were a wonderful father," Barbara assured him. "You gave our kids security and showed them the value of hard work. Don't regret that." "And you?" Thomas asked. "What do you regret?" Barbara thought for a long moment. "I regret worrying so much about what other people thought, what the neighbors thought of our house, what other teachers thought of my classroom, what other parents thought of our kids. I wasted so much energy on external validation instead of just trusting that we were doing our best." These conversations, deep and honest, brought them closer than they'd ever been. The island, for all its challenges, had given them something precious: undivided attention to each other and their relationship. Their second anniversary on the island was bittersweet. They'd survived 2 full years, an incredible achievement. But they'd also been missing for 2 years, isolated from everyone they loved. 47 years married, Barbara said. Who celebrates their 47th anniversary on a deserted island? Survivors, Thomas replied. Fighters. People who refuse to give up. But maintaining that fighting spirit became harder. Month 18 brought a period of illness for both of them, some kind of flu-like sickness that left them weak for weeks. Their garden struggled during an unusually dry period. Thomas injured his hand badly while building, limiting his ability to work for a month. These setbacks tested them severely. There were days when they wondered if they'd actually survive until rescue came, or if this island would be their final resting place. "I'm tired, Tom," Barbara admitted during one particularly difficult week. "I'm just so tired of fighting every day to survive. I want to go to a grocery store. I want to take a hot shower. I want to sleep in a real bed. I want to hug our children." Thomas held her, fighting his own exhaustion and despair. "I know, sweetheart, I know, but we've come this far. We can't give up now. What if rescue never comes?" she asked, voicing the fear they both carried but rarely spoke aloud. "What if we're here for the rest of our lives? Then we're here together," Thomas said firmly. "And that's not the worst fate, not the best, certainly, but not the worst. As long as we have each other, we can endure anything." But even Thomas had moments of doubt. One night, unable to sleep, he sat on the beach alone and stared at the stars. He was 72 years old. Before the shipwreck, he'd been thinking about slowing down, maybe taking up golf, enjoying quiet retirement activities. Instead, he was climbing trees, building structures and living like a pioneer from 2 centuries ago. Was this how his life would end? Not in a comfortable nursing home surrounded by family, but on this remote island, forgotten by the world. He shook off the dark thoughts. No, they would survive. They would be found. They had to believe that. To combat their declining morale, they created new rituals and traditions. Every sunset, they would stand together on the beach and list 3 things they were grateful for that day. Every full moon, they would have a dance party, holding each other and swaying to music only they could hear. They also decided to leave a legacy, just in case. Barbara expanded her journal significantly, not just recording their survival, but writing letters to their children and grandchildren. She wrote about lessons learned, wisdom gained, and love that never faded. Thomas built a memorial cairn, a carefully constructed stack of stones with their names and the date of the shipwreck carved into the largest stone. If they didn't survive, at least someday someone might find evidence they'd been there. As year 2 ended and year 3 began, they had reached a strange balance. They no longer panicked at not seeing rescue. They'd accepted their situation while maintaining hope. They survived day by day, week by week, building a life that was meaningful even in isolation, but they never stopped watching the horizon. The third year on the island brought unexpected transformation. Barbara and Thomas, now 70 and 73 years old, had become remarkably skilled at island living. But more importantly, they'd undergone profound personal changes. Barbara, who had always been somewhat anxious and worried about control, found peace in acceptance. She couldn't control the rescue timeline, the weather, or their circumstances. She could only control her response. This realization brought her a serenity she'd never experienced in her previous life. "You know what's strange?" she told Thomas one morning. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not of dying, not of never being rescued, not of anything. We've survived the unsurvivable. What else is there to fear?" Thomas noticed the change in her. The worried creases in her forehead had softened. She smiled more easily. She seemed at peace in a way he'd never seen in their 48 years of marriage. He'd changed too. The engineer who'd always needed plans, blueprints, and certainty had learned to embrace uncertainty and improvisation. He'd discovered creativity he didn't know he possessed. He'd learned that he was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. "I thought I knew who I was," he told Barbara. "Engineer, father, provider, defined by my career and responsibilities. But now, I'm a builder, a fisherman, a survivor. I've learned I'm adaptable and resilient. I found strength I didn't know I had." Their relationship had also transformed. The comfortable but sometimes distant companionship of long marriage had deepened into something more profound. They'd learned to communicate honestly, to appreciate each other's strengths, and to support each other's weaknesses. They'd also learned to find joy in simplicity. Watching a beautiful sunset became a treasured daily ritual. Successfully catching a fish was cause for celebration. Finding a new edible plant was exciting. Their definition of happiness had fundamentally changed. "Remember how stressed we'd get about stupid things?" Barbara said one day. "Traffic, bad service at restaurants, our neighbors' loud parties, those things seem so important. Now I realize how much energy we wasted on things that didn't matter." "What matters?" Thomas asked, though he knew her answer. "This," she said simply, taking his hand. "Us. Being alive. Being together. Everything else is just noise." They also developed a deep connection to the island itself. They named different areas: Paradise Cove, where they liked to swim; Sunset Point, where they watched evenings; Thomas's workshop, where he built things; Barbara's garden, where her plants grew. The island was no longer their prison. It had become their home. But they still longed for rescue, still missed their family desperately. Barbara would sometimes wake from dreams of holding her grandchildren, crying at the vividness of the dream and the pain of waking to reality. Thomas missed his son Robert's wedding, which he knew must have happened during their second year on the island. He'd never even met Robert's fiancée, Sarah. He missed watching his grandchildren grow up, missing birthdays and holidays and everyday moments. These losses hurt deeply, even as they found peace with their situation. In their third year, they made an important decision. They would create something permanent, a structure that would outlast them if necessary, and tell their story to whoever might someday find the island. Thomas designed and built what he called the Memory House. Using the sturdiest materials available and his best engineering principles, he constructed a small but solid structure, deep enough into the island to survive storms. Inside, they placed Barbara's journals, carefully preserved in waterproof containers made from tree sap and woven palm fronds. They included detailed maps of the island, descriptions of edible plants, instructions for survival techniques, and most importantly, letters to their family. "If we never make it off this island," Barbara said as they placed the final items inside, "at least someday someone will know we were here. Our family will know what happened to us. Our story won't be lost." They held a small ceremony when they finished, dedicating the memory house to their children and grandchildren. "To Rachel, Robert, and David," Barbara said, tears streaming down her face. "We love you more than words can express. We thought about you every single day. If you ever find this place, know that we never stopped hoping to see you again." "And to our grandchildren," Thomas added, his voice breaking, "Emma, Luke, and baby Sophie, whom we never got to meet. Your grandparents loved you. We built this place, lived here, and fought to survive because we hoped someday to hold you again. That night they held each other and cried for everything they'd lost and everything they'd found on this island. As year 3 progressed, they noticed they were both aging noticeably. The physical demands of island life, combined with their already advanced ages, were taking a toll. Thomas moved more slowly, his joints aching constantly. Barbara tired more easily than before. "We're not going to be able to do this forever," Thomas admitted. "Eventually, age will catch up to us even here." "I know," Barbara replied, "but we've had 3 years we never expected to have. 3 years of life we were supposed to have lost in that storm. That's a gift, even if it came wrapped in the strangest package imaginable." They began teaching each other their skills, just in case something happened to one of them. Thomas taught Barbara more advanced building and repair techniques. Barbara taught Thomas her cooking methods and plant knowledge. They wanted each to be able to survive alone if necessary, though neither liked thinking about that possibility. They also began thinking about what they'd do if they were actually rescued. It seemed almost impossible to imagine. How would they adjust back to normal life? Would their family even recognize them, physically and psychologically changed as they were? "I wonder if I'll be able to sleep in a quiet house," Barbara mused. "I'm so used to the sound of waves and birds and wind. Will silence feel strange? I wonder if I'll be able to go to a grocery store without being overwhelmed," Thomas added. "All those choices, all those people. This island has maybe 20 different foods we eat regularly. A store has thousands of options." "We'll adapt," Barbara said confidently. "We've proven we can adapt to anything." As they approached their 3-year anniversary on the island, they felt a strange mix of emotions: pride at what they'd accomplished and survived, sadness at what they'd missed, uncertainty about whether rescue would ever come, but also, surprisingly, gratitude for lessons learned and strength discovered. "If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be grateful for any aspect of being shipwrecked," Barbara said, "I'd have thought they were insane. But Tom, I am grateful. Not for being here, but for what we've learned, who we've become, and how close we've grown." "I understand," Thomas replied. "This has been the hardest 3 years of my life, but also, in some ways, the most meaningful. We've been stripped down to essentials: survival, love, partnership, resilience. Everything else fell away, and what remained was real and true." On the exact 3-year anniversary of washing up on the island's shore, they stood on the beach where they'd first arrived and renewed their vows once again. 48 years of marriage, Barbara said, including 3 years in the strangest circumstances imaginable. "Tom, I vow to love you whether we're rescued tomorrow or spend the rest of our lives here. You're my home wherever we are." "And I vow," Thomas replied, "to never take you or our time together for granted. Every day with you is a gift, even here, even now." They kissed as the sun set, 2 elderly people alone on an island, surrounded by nothing but ocean and sky, yet somehow feeling blessed. Neither of them knew that rescue was just 2 weeks away. 2 weeks after their 3-year anniversary on the island, Barbara was in her garden harvesting vegetables when she heard something unusual, a sound that didn't belong to their island symphony of waves, birds, and wind. An engine, mechanical, distant, but growing closer. Her heart began to race. How many times over 3 years had she imagined this moment? How many times had she thought she heard something only to be disappointed? "Tom," she called urgently. "Tom, come here." Thomas emerged from their house, immediately alert to the urgency in her voice. "What is it?" "Listen," she said, barely breathing. "Do you hear that?" They stood perfectly still, and there it was again. Definitely an engine. A boat engine. "The signal fire," Thomas shouted. "We need to light the signal fire now." They'd maintained the signal fire area for 3 years, always kept prepared with dry wood and kindling. Thomas grabbed the burning branch they kept constantly lit and ran toward the highest point of the island where they'd built their signal platform. Barbara grabbed the bright red fabric they'd salvaged from their life jackets years ago and prepared to wave it as a flag. Thomas reached the signal area and thrust the burning branch into the carefully arranged kindling. It caught immediately, flames growing rapidly. He added more wood, creating thick white smoke that rose high into the air. Barbara scrambled up beside him, waving the red fabric frantically. The engine sound was definitely getting closer, and then they saw it. A boat, white and official-looking, about half a mile offshore, moving parallel to the island. "They don't see us yet," Thomas said urgently. "Wave bigger. More smoke." He added green palm fronds to the fire, creating even thicker, darker smoke. Barbara waved the red fabric with every ounce of strength she had. The boat continued past them. "No," Barbara whispered. "No, no, no, please see us, please." Thomas grabbed bamboo sections they'd prepared years ago and banged them together, creating loud, cracking sounds. He shouted at the top of his lungs, though he knew the boat was too far away to hear. The boat began to turn away. Barbara felt despair crushing her chest. After 3 years, rescue had come within sight and was leaving. But then the boat paused. It began turning back. "They see us!" Thomas shouted. "They see the smoke." The boat changed direction, heading directly toward their island. Barbara collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief and disbelief. Thomas pulled her up, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. "We're going home," he said, barely able to believe the words. "Barb, we're actually going home." The boat was a Coast Guard cutter on routine patrol. The captain later explained they'd been charting rarely visited islands in the region. The massive smoke signal had been visible for miles. When the rescue boat reached the shore, the Coast Guard personnel couldn't believe what they found. 2 elderly people, deeply tanned, wearing clothes made from woven plant fibers and animal skins, emerging from a surprisingly sophisticated camp that looked like something from a survival documentary. "Sir, ma'am, how long have you been here?" the commanding officer asked, stunned. 3 years, Thomas replied, his voice cracking. 3 years, 1 week and 2 days. The Coast Guard team was shocked. They'd been on a routine patrol, not a rescue mission. They had no idea anyone was missing or stranded on this remote island. "You've been here 3 years?" a young Coast Guard member repeated, incredulous. "How did you survive?" "Together," Barbara said simply, holding Thomas's hand. "We survived together." The Coast Guard team needed several hours to process what they'd found and verify Barbara and Thomas's identities. The couple had been declared legally dead 2.5 years earlier, after extensive search and rescue efforts found no survivors beyond the 200 people rescued immediately after the shipwreck. "Your family thinks you died in that storm," the captain said gently. "This is going to be quite a shock for them." Before leaving, Barbara and Thomas asked for 1 hour to say goodbye to the island. The Coast Guard team, understanding the strange request, agreed. They walked through their camp, touching structures they'd built, visiting places that had become meaningful. They went to Barbara's garden, now lush and productive. They visited the memory house, where their journals remained safely stored. They stood at the spot where they'd renewed their vows. "This place saved our lives," Barbara said softly. "It gave us shelter and food and purpose. I know that sounds strange, but I'm grateful to this island." "I am too," Thomas agreed. "We're leaving parts of ourselves here. 3 years of our lives, lessons learned, versions of ourselves that only existed in this place. We're not the same people who washed up on this beach." They gathered a few items to take with them. Barbara's calendar stone with its 3 years of marks, some of her journal pages, a few tools Thomas had made, and 2 smooth stones from their wedding renewal spot. "Ready?" the Coast Guard captain asked gently. Thomas took one last look at the island that had been their prison and their home. "Yes, we're ready." As the Coast Guard boat pulled away from the shore, Barbara and Thomas stood at the rail, watching the island grow smaller in the distance. 3 years of their lives had happened on that small piece of land. 3 years of challenge, growth, loss, and unexpected discovery. "Thank you," Barbara whispered to the island, knowing it couldn't hear but needing to say it anyway. "Thank you for keeping us alive." The journey back to civilization was overwhelming in ways Barbara and Thomas couldn't have anticipated. The Coast Guard boat had modern technology, engines, radios, computers, all things they hadn't seen or heard in 3 years. The sounds were jarring. The speed felt unnatural. Even the plastic and metal surfaces felt strange after years of only natural materials. The crew treated them with incredible kindness. providing food, water, clean clothes, and medical attention. A doctor on board examined them thoroughly. "Remarkably, you're both in decent health, considering your ordeal," the doctor reported. "Undernourished, certainly. Some vitamin deficiencies, sun damage to your skin, but overall you've survived incredibly well. Your ingenuity and resourcefulness likely saved your lives." The boat radioed ahead to notify authorities, and most importantly to contact Barbara and Thomas's family. "We've reached your daughter Rachel," the communications officer reported. She couldn't speak at first. She thought it was a cruel prank, but when we verified details, she became hysterical with joy. "She's contacting your other children now. They're arranging to meet you when we dock in Miami." Barbara cried upon hearing this. Her children were alive, grown older without her, living lives she'd missed years of. Soon she'd see them again. As the boat approached Miami, Barbara and Thomas stood on deck, watching the city grow larger. Skyscrapers, boats, planes overhead, the noise and bustle of civilization. "It's so much," Barbara whispered, overwhelmed. "I forgot how big everything is, how fast everything moves." Thomas squeezed her hand, feeling equally disoriented. The island had been quiet, simple, natural. This was chaos and complexity, beyond what they'd experienced in years. When they docked, a crowd waited. News media had gotten wind of the miraculous rescue. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Barbara and Thomas only saw three faces pushing through the crowd. Rachel, now 48 years old, 3 years older than when they'd last seen her. Robert, 45, with grey in his hair that hadn't been there before. David, 42, taller than his mother remembered. "Mom, Dad!" Rachel screamed, running toward them. The reunion was overwhelming. All 5 of them collapsed into a sobbing embrace on the dock, holding each other desperately, unable to believe it was real. "We thought you were dead," Robert kept repeating. "We had a funeral, we mourned you, how is this possible?" "We survived," Thomas said simply. "We found an island, and we survived." "For 3 years?" David asked incredulously. "Mom, Dad, you were alone on an island for 3 years at your age. How did you not die?" "We had each other," Barbara replied, tears streaming down her face. "And we had hope. We never stopped hoping to see you again." The children had so many questions, but authorities intervened. Barbara and Thomas needed medical evaluation, rest, and time to decompress before intensive questioning. They were taken to a hospital where they spent 3 days undergoing comprehensive medical examinations and psychological evaluation. The psychologist assigned to them was fascinated by their story. 3 years of complete isolation at your ages should have caused severe psychological trauma, she said. Yet both of you seem remarkably well adjusted. How do you explain that? "We had purpose," Thomas explained. "Surviving wasn't just existing. We built a life, maintained routines, supported each other. We didn't just wait to be rescued, we lived. And honestly," Barbara added, "we had the best possible partner for the situation. If I'd been alone, I wouldn't have survived. If Tom had been with someone else, maybe it wouldn't have worked. But we've been married 48 years, we know each other completely. We were able to work together seamlessly," the psychologist wrote extensively in her notes. Their case would become a landmark study in survival psychology and the role of partnership in extreme situations. After 3 days in the hospital, Barbara and Thomas were finally allowed to go home with their children. But home no longer existed as they'd left it. Their house in Portland had been sold after they were declared dead. Their belongings had been distributed among their children or donated. Everything from their previous life was gone. "We can figure out housing," Rachel said. "You can stay with one of us until we find you a place." But the bigger adjustment was to modern life itself. The noise of traffic was startling. Grocery stores were overwhelming with their endless choices. Television news felt frenetic and disturbing. Even sleeping in a soft bed felt strange after years on firm woven palm fronds. "Everything moves so fast," Barbara said one evening at Rachel's house. "Everyone is always rushing somewhere, looking at phones, stressed about things that seem so trivial. Did we used to live like this?" "We did," Thomas confirmed, "and we never realized how exhausting it was until we experienced something different." They also struggled with the attention. Their story had captured national and international media interest. News outlets wanted interviews. Book publishers offered contracts. Movie producers called about rights to their story. Elderly couple survives 3 years on deserted island. Through ingenuity and love, the headlines read. They became minor celebrities, their story inspiring people around the world. But Barbara and Thomas found the attention exhausting. They'd survived 3 years of quiet solitude. Now everyone wanted a piece of their story. "I just want to be with my family," Barbara told Rachel. "I want to meet my grandchildren, hear about the 3 years I missed, rebuild normal life. I don't want to be famous." Rachel understood and began carefully managing media requests, limiting them significantly. The reunion with grandchildren was both joyful and bittersweet. Emma was now 8 years old, barely remembering the grandparents who disappeared when she was 5. Luke was 6 with only vague memories, and baby Sophie, now 3 years old, had been born just before the cruise and had no memory of them at all. "Grandma, where did you go?" Emma asked with childlike directness. "We were on an island, sweetie," Barbara explained gently. "Far away. We couldn't get home, but we never stopped thinking about you." "Did you have fun?" Luke asked innocently. Thomas smiled sadly. "Some parts were fun. We learned to do things we never knew we could do, but mostly we missed you. We missed you so much." 6 months after their rescue, Barbara and Thomas sat in a small apartment they'd rented in Portland, close to their children, adjusting to their new normal. They'd turned down most media requests, but had agreed to write a book about their experience. The advance from the publisher gave them financial stability. More importantly, writing helped them process everything they'd experienced. "What do you want people to understand about what happened to us?" Barbara asked Thomas as they worked on the book together. Thomas thought carefully. "I want people to understand that survival isn't just physical. It's mental, emotional, and spiritual. We survived because we gave ourselves purpose, maintained our dignity and never lost hope, but also because we loved each other and worked as a team. I want people to understand how little we actually need," Barbara added. "We lived 3 years with almost nothing material, and in some ways we were richer than we'd ever been. We had time, attention, presence. Those are luxuries people with everything often don't have." Their story resonated deeply with people facing their own struggles. They received thousands of letters from people inspired by their resilience, their partnership, and their attitude toward adversity. One letter particularly moved them, from a woman going through a difficult divorce. "Your story showed me that what matters most isn't circumstances, but how we respond to them. You were trapped on an island, but you didn't let that trap your spirits. Thank you for reminding me that I have more strength than I knew." Barbara and Thomas also grappled with complicated feelings about their experience. They'd lost 3 years with their family. They'd missed births, weddings, milestones, and everyday moments they could never get back. That loss was real and painful, but they'd also gained something profound. They'd discovered strengths they didn't know they possessed. They'd deepened their marriage in ways that might never have happened in normal life. They'd learned to appreciate simplicity and presence. They'd proven to themselves that they could overcome almost anything. "Would I choose to do it again?" Thomas said during one interview. "Absolutely not. It was terrifying, exhausting, and heartbreaking. But do I regret who we became because of it? No. We're different people now. Stronger, wiser, more grateful. That's worth something." They also became advocates for elderly adventure and capability. At 70 and 73, they'd survived conditions that would challenge people half their age. This shattered stereotypes about elderly limitations. Age is just a number when it comes to resilience and capability, Barbara told audiences. Yes, we were older. Yes, it was harder physically than it would have been at 30, but we had something younger people often lack: patience, life experience, and a long-term partnership that taught us how to work together. Those advantages mattered more than physical youth. Their story also sparked serious conversations about cruise ship safety, rescue protocols, and support for families of missing persons. Changes were implemented in the cruise industry, partly because of attention their case brought to safety gaps. 1 year after their rescue, they returned to the Caribbean with a documentary film crew, traveling by boat to their island. It was a strange homecoming, seeing the place where they'd spent 3 of the most challenging years of their lives. Their house still stood, weathered but intact. Barbara's garden had grown wild but was still producing. The memory house remained secure, their journals preserved inside exactly as they'd left them. "It's smaller than I remembered," Thomas said, looking at the camp they'd built. "In my memory it was huge, elaborate, but really, it's quite modest." "It was huge in significance," Barbara replied. "Not in size. This place saved our lives." They retrieved the journals from the memory house, wanting to preserve them for their family and for the book they were writing. The film crew documented everything, creating a documentary that would later win awards for its emotional depth and unique story. Before leaving the island, they held a small ceremony thanking the place that had sheltered them and saying a final goodbye. "This island was our prison and our salvation," Thomas said to the camera, speaking to a future audience. "We hated it and loved it. It tested us beyond anything we'd ever imagined, but it also taught us about resilience, partnership, and what truly matters in life. We're leaving it now, hopefully forever, but we'll carry its lessons with us always." 2 years after their rescue, Barbara and Thomas celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and friends. It was a large party, a celebration not just of 50 years together, but of survival, resilience, and love that endured even the most extreme circumstances. 50 years, Barbara said in her toast, including 3 years on a deserted island. That's not how we planned it, but those 3 years taught us more about our marriage than the previous 45. We learned that we could rely on each other completely, that our partnership was unbreakable, and that together we could overcome anything. Thomas added his own words. "People ask me what the secret is to 50 years of marriage. I tell them it's simple. Marry someone you'd want to be stranded on a deserted island with, because life throws curveballs. Circumstances change. Disasters happen. You need a partner who will face those things with you, solve problems with you, and never give up on you. I found that partner 50 years ago, and I'm grateful every single day." Their book, 3 Years, A Love Story of Survival, became a bestseller. The documentary about their experience won multiple awards. But more than the fame or recognition, they treasured the relationships they'd rebuilt with their family and the new appreciation they had for ordinary moments. "I never thought I'd be grateful for things like hot showers, soft beds, and grocery stores," Barbara admitted. "But after 3 years without them, I'll never take those simple things for granted again." They also never took each other for granted. Every day they made time to sit together, talk, and appreciate their partnership. They'd learned on the island that presence and attention were precious gifts, more valuable than any material possession. 5 years after their rescue, now 75 and 78 years old, Barbara and Thomas lived quietly in Portland, close to their children. They gave occasional talks about their experience, but mostly they enjoyed simple retirement, time with grandchildren, walks in the park, quiet evenings at home. But they were different people than the couple who'd boarded that cruise ship years earlier. They'd been tested by extreme circumstances and emerged stronger. They'd discovered capabilities they never knew they possessed. They'd learned what truly mattered: love, partnership, resilience, and hope. "Was it worth it?" a journalist asked during their final major interview, 5 years after rescue. Barbara and Thomas looked at each other, communicating wordlessly the way couples married for decades can do. "Worth it?" Thomas finally replied. "No one would choose to be shipwrecked. No one would volunteer for 3 years of isolation and struggle. But did we gain something valuable from the experience? Yes. We gained clarity about what matters, confidence in our capabilities, and gratitude for every day we have together. We also gained a story," Barbara added with a smile. "A hell of a story. When we tell our great-grandchildren someday about when Grandma and Grandpa were shipwrecked and survived 3 years on a deserted island, they'll think we're making it up, but we'll have proof. We'll have our journals, our photographs, our documentary. We'll be able to show them that even in the darkest circumstances, human beings can survive, adapt, and even find meaning and joy." Their story became a testament to human resilience, the power of partnership, and the strength that emerges when we're tested by circumstances beyond our control. They proved that age is no barrier to survival, that love can sustain us through anything, and that hope, however faint, is worth holding on to, even when rescue seems impossible. Barbara and Thomas Green, the elderly couple who survived 3 years alone on a deserted island, became symbols of endurance and partnership. Their legacy wasn't just about surviving shipwreck and isolation. It was about facing the impossible and refusing to give up, about maintaining dignity and humanity in the most difficult circumstances, and about the power of two people working together to overcome anything life throws at them. If this incredible story of survival, partnership, and resilience touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful true stories about ordinary people who face extraordinary circumstances and discover strength they never knew they possessed. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. And let us know in the comments, could you survive 3 years on a deserted island? What would be your biggest challenge? What skills do you have that might help you survive? Share your thoughts below, because your perspective adds to the conversation and might inspire someone else. Barbara and Thomas's story teaches us profound lessons, that age doesn't determine capability or resilience, that partnership and teamwork can overcome almost any obstacle, that we're capable of adapting to circumstances we never imagined facing, that what we think we need to be happy is often far less than what we actually have. Most importantly, their story reminds us that hope matters. Even when rescue seemed impossible, even when they'd been given up for dead, they never completely abandoned hope. And that hope, combined with practical action and unwavering partnership, ultimately saved their lives. So whatever challenges you're facing today, whatever circumstances feel overwhelming, remember Barbara and Thomas. Remember that two people in their late 60s and early 70s survived 3 years alone on a deserted island through ingenuity, love, and refusal to give up. If they could do that, what are you capable of? Thanks for watching. Share this story with someone who needs inspiration today. And remember, survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about maintaining your humanity, your dignity, and your hope even when everything seems impossible. We'll see you in the next story.